The Ozari do not understand the meaning of the word impossible, Professor Vex'lar announced to the assembled officers in the vast amphitheater of the Galactic Academy. His 8 obsidian eyes scanned the room, settling briefly on the lone human in the crowd. Our species has achieved space travel, dimensional folding, and consciousness transfer. We have conquered disease, mastered terraforming, and brought peace to 17 star systems. Commander Elena Chen sat ramrod straight in her uniform, the blue and silver of Earth's interstellar defense force standing out amidst the varied garb of the alien officers. She was the first human to be accepted into the prestigious advanced tactical training program of the Galactic Confederation, and the whispers that followed her through the Academy's halls made it clear how many doubted she belonged. Survival is the cornerstone of military excellence, Vex'lar continued, his voice reverberating through the chamber. Tomorrow, each of you will be transported to an isolated testing ground on Novus VII. You will have precisely 48 Earth hours to construct a shelter capable of withstanding the planet's notorious ice storms. The materials at your disposal will be minimal. Those who succeed will advance to the next phase of training. Those who fail, the professor's mandibles clicked in what Elena had come to recognize as the Ozari equivalent of a dismissive smile. Well, failure at this stage would be most embarrassing for your respective worlds, wouldn't it? Elena felt the weight of Earth's hopes on her shoulders. Humanity had only recently been granted provisional membership in the Confederation after centuries of isolation. Their technological capabilities lagged centuries behind most member species. The only reason they'd been invited to join at all was their unexpected victory against a Krell invasion fleet, a victory that many Confederation members attributed to luck rather than skill. As the briefing concluded, Kaz'tur, the 7-foot-tall draconian officer seated beside Elena, leaned over. "Don't be discouraged, human," he said, voice rumbling with barely concealed condescension. "Perhaps the professors will grade you on a curve, considering your limitations." Elena offered a tight smile. "I appreciate your concern, Lieutenant Kaz'tur, but I've weathered worse storms than what Novus VII can throw at me." The draconian's scaled brow ridge rose. "Have you now?" The temperatures dropped to -80 degrees during storm cycles. The winds can strip flesh from bone. And Professor Vex'lar specifically selected this challenge because shelter construction requires materials engineering that your species has yet to master. "Then I suppose I'll have to get creative," Elena replied, rising from her seat. "Humans have a particular talent for that." As she walked away, Elena heard Kaz'tur's amused huffing to his companions. She wasn't surprised. The Draconians, with their engineered physiology that allowed them to survive in almost any environment, saw little value in adaptation skills. The Ozari, the dominant species in the Confederation and the architects of this training program, had evolved in a perfect paradise world before developing the technology to make any environment equally hospitable. None of them understood what it meant to come from Earth, a planet that had tried to kill humans with everything from ice ages to plagues, from predators to natural disasters. Humanity hadn't survived and thrived because they were stronger or smarter. They had endured because they refused to accept defeat. Back in her quarters, Elena reviewed what little information the Academy database provided about Novus VII. A mining outpost abandoned 50 years ago due to increasingly severe weather patterns. Minimal native flora or fauna. Remnants of the mining operation still scattered across the landscape. Nothing immediately useful for shelter construction according to Confederation engineering standards. Elena smiled as she packed her regulation survival kit. The Confederation had a very narrow definition of useful. Humans had been repurposing and reimagining materials since they first picked up sticks and stones. "Commander Chen," her room's AI announced, "you have a private communication from Earth Command." A moment later, the holographic form of Admiral Jackson appeared. Her former commanding officer's face was lined with more worry than when she'd last seen him 6 months ago. "Commander, how's your training progressing?" he asked without preamble. "I'm still here, sir. One of 12 remaining from the original 30 applicants." "And after tomorrow?" Elena squared her shoulders. "I'll still be here, sir." The Admiral nodded. "Good. Because I'm afraid the stakes have just gotten higher. The Confederation Security Council is voting next month on whether to grant Earth full membership status. The Ozari delegation has made it clear that your performance at the Academy will heavily influence their decision." "No pressure," Elena muttered. The Krell incursion last year was just the beginning, Elena, the Admiral said, dropping formality. Our long-range sensors have detected increased activity near the outer colonies. Intelligence suggests they're gathering for another push into our territory. Without Confederation protection and technology sharing, Earth doesn't stand a chance against a full-scale invasion. I understand, sir. I know you do. That's why you're there. His expression softened. Your father would be proud, Elena. He always said you were the most resourceful officer he'd ever trained. Elena swallowed hard. Her father had died defending Earth's orbital platform during the first Krell attack. Thank you, sir. I won't let Earth down. After the Admiral's image faded, Elena returned to her preparations with renewed determination. She added one unauthorized item to her kit, a small multi-tool that had belonged to her father. It wasn't much, just a compact folding device with various implements, but it represented something the Confederation species seemed to have forgotten. Sometimes the oldest technologies were the most reliable. The transport deposited Elena on a barren, windswept plain of Novus VII exactly at dawn. Gray clouds hung low overhead, threatening the first of many storms. The air was already bitterly cold, her breath forming thick plumes as she surveyed her surroundings. About a kilometer away, she could make out the jagged silhouettes of the abandoned mining facility, a collection of collapsed structures and equipment, half buried under decades of ice and debris. Her issued supplies consisted of a thermal blanket, 1 day's worth of nutrition pellets, a water purifier, and a basic energy probe for detecting dangerous radiation or electrical current, standard Confederation emergency gear, but nothing specifically designed for construction. Elena checked her positioning device. She had been assigned Zone 47, far from the other participants. Each zone offered similar challenges and resources or lack thereof. The Confederation valued individual problem solving. There would be no teamwork in this test. Her thermal suit would protect her for approximately 12 hours before its power cells needed recharging, a deliberate limitation imposed by the test parameters. Which meant she had half a day to locate materials, formulate a plan, and begin construction before she would start feeling the bite of Novus VII's killing cold. Elena set off toward the mining ruins at a steady jog, her mind already cataloging possibilities. As the facility grew closer, she saw it was in worse condition than the aerial scans had suggested. Centuries of storms had torn through metal and composite materials that had likely been cutting edge when installed. Nothing remained intact. Perfect, Elena whispered to herself with a grim smile. She began a methodical search, moving from one collapsed structure to another. While most candidates would be looking for intact panels or framework components, construction materials as defined by conventional Confederation engineering, Elena was hunting for something else entirely. In the third structure, half buried under twisted metal framing, she found it, the remnants of an industrial heating system. Though the outer casing was corroded beyond repair, the internal components, including a remarkably intact thermal regulator and power coupling, were preserved by the same cold that made this planet so deadly. Thank you, terrible weather, she murmured as she carefully extracted the components using her father's multi-tool. Over the next 4 hours, Elena collected a salvage heap that made little sense by Confederation building standards: thermal regulators, power couplings, coolant pipes, sensor arrays, and most importantly, the remains of an old ion engine from a mining hauler. As she worked, the wind began to intensify. The storm was coming sooner than predicted. She needed to act quickly. Moving to a depression in the ground that offered minimal shelter from the wind, Elena began assembling what looked less like a conventional structure and more like a haphazard machine. Using the coolant pipes as a framework, she created a dome-like skeleton. Rather than trying to cover it with the limited materials available, she focused on the thermal components. The ion engine, though not operational for propulsion, still contained a functioning electromagnetic field generator. With careful rewiring using the mining facility's stripped sensor circuits, Elena converted it into a makeshift force field projector. She placed the thermal regulators at strategic points around the perimeter of her dome. With her energy probe repurposed as a power source redistribution node, she connected everything into a circuit that would, if her calculations were correct, generate a thin but effective electromagnetic barrier. The first ice pellets began to fall as Elena made the final connections. Her fingers were numb despite her thermal gloves, and the suit's power was dropping faster than expected due to the plummeting temperature. "Come on," she whispered as she connected the last coupling. "Work for me." She activated the system. Nothing happened. Elena checked her connections, found a faulty junction, and rewired it. Still nothing. The storm intensified, ice pellets turning to razor shards that stung her exposed face. Her thermal suit beeped a 10% power warning. She had perhaps an hour before hypothermia would set in. Elena closed her eyes, thinking through the system. What was she missing? The principles were sound. She had essentially created an electromagnetic bubble that should repel the ice particles while trapping heat inside. But something was preventing activation. Then it hit her: the calibration. The system was designed for Ozari specifications. Their technology operated on different baseline parameters than what humans typically used. Pulling out her father's multi-tool one more time, she adjusted the power flow, reducing it to 80% of what she had originally planned, matching the more efficient Ozari standard rather than the robust human one. She activated the system again. For a moment, nothing changed. Then a soft hum emanated from the ion engine core. A shimmer, like heat rising from sun-baked asphalt, appeared around the perimeter of her dome. The ice particles that had been pelting her suddenly veered away, deflected by an invisible barrier. Inside the dome, the temperature began to rise. Elena laughed in relief and exhaustion as she crawled fully into her unconventional shelter. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't conventional, but it was working. The electromagnetic field was repelling the ice while reflecting her body heat back inside, creating a pocket of survivable warmth that would only improve as the thermal regulators reached optimal function. She activated her communications device. Commander Chen, checking in from Zone 47. Shelter established. All systems operational. There was a pause before Professor Vex'lar's voice responded, a note of surprise evident even through the translator. Acknowledged, Commander. Our sensors indicate your position, but we're not detecting a conventional shelter structure. Please clarify. With respect, Professor, your parameters were for a shelter capable of withstanding Novus VII's storm conditions. You did not specify the method or materials. My solution meets the requirements through unconventional application of available resources. Another pause. We will evaluate your solution when the testing period concludes, Commander. Vex'lar out. As the communication ended, Elena settled back against one of the coolant pipes that formed her dome's skeleton. Outside, the storm had escalated to a full-force gale, ice particles now mixed with larger chunks that would have caused serious injury had they struck her. Inside, the temperature had risen to a relatively comfortable 10 degrees Celsius. She allowed herself a small smile. This was only the first challenge, but it was one that had been specifically designed to disadvantage humans. If she could overcome this, she could face whatever came next. As she prepared to rest, her communications device activated again. This time, it was Kaz'tur's voice. Chen. Chen, are you there? My shelter has failed. The storm intensified beyond predictions. Elena sat up straight. What's your position, Lieutenant? Zone 38. Approximately 3 kilometers northeast of your location according to command tracking. My thermal suit is at 4% power. I don't. His voice faltered. Confederation protocol dictates I inform you I am in distress, but do not expect assistance. Glory to the Draconians. The communication cut off. Elena checked her navigation device. Zone 38 was indeed within range, though reaching it would mean venturing out into the storm at its worst. Confederation protocol was clear: each candidate was on their own. Assisting another would result in disqualification for both parties, but human protocol was different. No one gets left behind, Elena muttered as she began modifications to her shelter. If she couldn't go to Kaz'tur without abandoning her shelter, she would bring her shelter to him. Converting her stationary shelter into a mobile unit required sacrificing stability for portability. Elena disconnected the larger thermal regulators, keeping only the essential power systems and the ion engine core with its electromagnetic field generator. She fashioned a crude harness from coolant pipes and sensor housing, creating a backpack-like apparatus that maintained a bubble of protected space around her. The modified shelter wouldn't last long, perhaps 2 hours before the power couplings failed, but it should be enough to reach Kaz'tur and bring him back to her original location, where she could rebuild the more stable version. Stepping out into the storm was like walking into a wall of knives. Even with the electromagnetic field deflecting most of the ice, the sheer force of the wind threatened to knock her off her feet. Elena leaned forward, using her body weight to counterbalance the gale as she checked her navigation device and began trudging northeast. Every step was a battle against the elements. Twice, larger ice formations broke through her protective field, leaving gashes in her thermal suit that immediately began leaking precious heat. The temperature readout on her heads-up display dropped steadily as her suit's power reserves dwindled. After 40 grueling minutes, Elena crested a ridge and spotted a dark mass ahead, the remains of Kaz'tur's shelter. The Draconian had attempted a more conventional structure using metallic panels from the mining facility, but the storm had torn through his construction as if it were made of paper. "Kaz'tur," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. A movement caught her eye, a large form huddled beneath a partially collapsed wall section. The Draconian was alive, but as Elena approached, she could see his normally vibrant scales had dulled to a sickly gray. Draconians were hardy, but even they had limits. "Chen." Kaz'tur's voice was weak. "What are you doing here?" "The test can wait," Elena finished, kneeling beside him. "My shelter is stable but not here. We need to get back to my zone." The Draconian's eyes widened as he took in her makeshift mobile unit. "That is not a standard shelter design." "I'm not a standard candidate," Elena replied with a grim smile. "Can you walk?" Kaz'tur struggled to his feet, towering over her despite his weakened state. "I can manage. But your field cannot protect us both at this proximity." "The power requirements, already calculated," Elena interrupted, making quick adjustments to the ion engine core. "It'll hold long enough to get us back. The field strength increases when containing similar biosignatures. It's a quirk of the Ozari design I noticed while building it." This wasn't entirely true, but she needed Kaz'tur focused on survival, not on protesting her assistance. Together, they began the journey back to Zone 47, moving slowly against the worsening storm. Elena continually adjusted her makeshift device, rerouting power as systems began to fail under the strain. Her fingers, exposed when she had to make delicate adjustments, were numb and beginning to show signs of frostbite. "Why?" Kaz'tur asked as they paused behind a rocky outcropping that provided momentary relief from the wind. "Why risk disqualification? Your world needs you to succeed here." Elena glanced at him while reconnecting a power coupling that had come loose. "On Earth, we have a saying, the true measure of a society is found in how it treats those in need. Your society has not yet achieved interstellar travel without assistance," Kaz'tur pointed out. "Perhaps your priorities are misaligned. Or perhaps we understand something the Confederation has forgotten," Elena countered. "Technology without compassion is just machinery. Power without purpose is just waste." Before Kaz'tur could respond, a massive ice formation more bolder than particle crashed through their protective field, striking the Draconian in the shoulder. He roared in pain as the impact sent him sprawling into the snow. Elena dragged him back under the field's protection, but it was flickering now, power reserves critically low. Kaz'tur's shoulder was dislocated, the scales around it cracked and bleeding. "Leave me," the Draconian commanded. "Your shelter is still operational in Zone 47. You can make it back alone." "Not happening," Elena said through gritted teeth. She examined her power system. One more rerouting might provide enough energy for a final push to her zone, but it would mean sacrificing the navigational system. Without precise coordinates, they could easily become disoriented in the whiteout conditions. It was a gamble she had to take. Elena made the adjustments, watched as her navigation device went dark, and helped Kaz'tur to his feet. "We go that way," she said, pointing in what she hoped was the correct direction. "And we don't stop until we reach my shelter." For the next hour, they struggled through the storm, guided only by Elena's stubborn determination and fading memory of the landscape. The electromagnetic field flickered constantly now, each failure allowing more of the killing cold to seep into their bones. Just as Elena felt her legs beginning to give out, they crested a small rise, and she recognized the depression where she had built her original shelter. It was still there, the dome skeleton visible despite the snow accumulation, thermal regulators still functioning. "We made it," she gasped, helping Kaz'tur down the slope. Once inside, Elena quickly reconnected her mobile unit to the main shelter systems, restoring full power to the electromagnetic field and thermal regulators. The temperature inside began to rise immediately. Kaz'tur watched in silence as she worked, his reptilian features unreadable. Finally, as she finished stabilizing the shelter, he spoke. You have violated the parameters of the test, Commander Chen. Elena nodded, too exhausted to argue. I have. And yet, the Draconian continued, you have achieved something no other candidate accomplished. You created not only a functioning shelter from discarded components but adapted it for mobility and rescue operations. He flexed his injured shoulder, which was already beginning to heal thanks to his species' regenerative abilities. The Draconians have long considered humans to be technologically inferior. I see now this assessment was incomplete. Elena managed a tired smile. We make up for it in other ways. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden activation of Elena's communication device. Professor Vex'lar's voice emerged, clearer now that they were inside the stabilized shelter. Commander Chen, our monitoring systems indicate you have taken an unauthorized excursion from your assigned zone and are now sheltering with Lieutenant Kaz'tur. Explain yourself. Elena straightened despite her exhaustion. Lieutenant Kaz'tur's shelter failed, Professor. He was in distress. I modified my shelter design for mobility and retrieved him. Such action is grounds for immediate disqualification of both participants, Vex'lar stated coldly. The parameters of the test were clear. With respect, Professor, Elena replied, the parameters stated we must construct a shelter capable of withstanding Novus VII's storms. Mine has done so with enough efficiency that it could be adapted for rescue operations while maintaining functionality. I would argue this demonstrates superior design rather than failure to comply. There was a long pause. Elena could almost imagine the Ozari professor's mandibles clicking in annoyance. Finally, Vex'lar spoke again. You will both remain where you are. The test concludes in 14 hours. A full evaluation will be conducted at that time. The communication ended. Kaz'tur looked at Elena. You may have sacrificed your world's future to save an officer who would not have done the same for you. Elena shrugged. If the Confederation would reject Earth for demonstrating one of humanity's greatest strengths, then perhaps we're better off finding our own way in the galaxy. When the storm finally abated and the transport arrived to collect them, Elena and Kaz'tur were met not only by Professor Vex'lar but by the Academy's commandant, a distinguished Ozari whose carapace bore the marks of countless campaigns. They were brought not to the standard debriefing chamber but to the Academy's grand observation deck, where the remaining candidates were already assembled, along with what appeared to be a delegation of high-ranking Confederation officials. Commander Chen, Lieutenant Kaz'tur, Vex'lar addressed them as they entered. Your test results have prompted considerable discussion among the Academy leadership. Elena stood at attention, her face betraying nothing despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. Earth's future might well depend on what happened in the next few minutes. The Commandant stepped forward. The Novus VII challenge was designed to test individual problem-solving and resource management under extreme conditions. The parameters were intentionally restrictive to evaluate each candidate's ability to function within established protocols. He paused, 8 obsidian eyes fixed on Elena. Commander Chen, your approach defied conventional Confederation engineering principles, Ozari shelter design parameters, and ultimately, the individualistic nature of the test itself. Elena swallowed hard but remained silent. The question before us, the Commandant continued, is whether these deviations represent failure or innovation. To everyone's surprise, Kaz'tur stepped forward. If I may speak, Commandant. The Ozari leader inclined his head, granting permission. I have served the Confederation for 20 cycles, the Draconian began. In that time, I have adhered rigorously to protocols and procedures. When my shelter failed on Novus VII, I prepared for death as our training dictates. Commander Chen refused to accept this outcome. He gestured to the other candidates. How many of us completed functional shelters? 7 of 12, Professor Vex'lar replied. And how many of those shelters could have been adapted for mobile rescue operations while maintaining protective integrity? Vex'lar's mandibles clicked once. None. The Krell, Kaz'tur continued, defeated 3 Confederation battle groups before they reached Earth. Our intelligence indicated the humans would fall within days. Instead, they prevailed using outdated technology and unorthodox tactics. I now understand why. They refuse to accept parameters that limit their survival. The Commandant considered this. Commander Chen, explain your shelter design. Elena stepped forward, describing in detail how she had repurposed the mining facility components to create not just a protective structure but an adaptive system that could respond to changing conditions. She explained how human engineers had always focused on adaptability over perfection, on finding multiple uses for limited resources. Where we come from, she concluded, we don't have the luxury of ideal materials or optimal conditions. Earth has forced us to adapt or die from the beginning of our history. It's not a weakness. It's our greatest strength. The commandant was silent for a long moment. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he made the Ozari gesture of profound respect, a complex movement of his upper limbs that was rarely directed at non-Ozari. The Confederation was founded on principles of mutual protection and knowledge exchange, he said. Yet over millennia, we have perhaps become too rigid in our definitions of both. The Krell threat reminds us that evolution requires adaptation, not just technological advancement. He turned to address the assembled officials. I recommend not only that Commander Chen continue her training at the Academy but that her shelter design be submitted to the Confederation Engineering Corps for further development. The applications for emergency response alone are considerable. A murmur ran through the crowd. One of the officials, an elderly Ozari with elaborate decorations on her carapace, stepped forward. I am Supreme Counselor Vex'lar, she announced. The Security Council vote regarding Earth's full membership was scheduled for next month. In light of today's demonstration, I see no reason for delay. The human capacity for unconventional problem-solving is precisely what the Confederation needs in the face of the Krell resurgence. She gestured to Elena. Commander Chen has demonstrated that humanity brings more to our alliance than we anticipated. The Security Council will convene tomorrow to formalize Earth's full membership, with all the technology sharing and defense commitments that entails. Elena felt a wave of relief so profound her knees nearly buckled. She had secured not just her own future at the Academy but Earth's place in the Confederation and the protection that came with it. As the assembly dispersed, Professor Vex'lar approached her. Your solution was inelegant by Ozari standards, Commander. But effective, Elena replied. Indeed. Effectiveness ultimately outweighs elegance. The professor's mandibles clicked in what she now recognized as thoughtful consideration rather than dismissal. Perhaps there is much we can learn from each other. Later, as Elena sent her report to Admiral Jackson, she included one final observation: the Confederation has achieved technological marvels, but they've forgotten something essential along the way, that the true strength of any species lies not in the tools they create but in the spirit that drives them to create in the first place. Humanity doesn't just build shelters against the storm, we learn to dance in the rain. The Admiral's response was brief but said everything. Your father would be proud, Commander. Earth will not forget what you've accomplished today. Elena looked out at the stars visible through her quarter's viewport. Somewhere out there, the Krell were gathering, preparing for another assault. But Earth no longer stood alone. And the Confederation was beginning to remember what it meant to adapt. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not because they had the most advanced technology or the strongest warriors, but because they possessed something far more valuable: the unbreakable determination to find a way forward, no matter the odds. As her father had always said, the universe doesn't care about impossible. It only cares about who refuses to accept it.